we're going to be looking at is information and thinking. Now, there's one being who can't possibly think and can't possibly have a sense of humor. I'm not going to ask you who it is, because I'm going to tell you. And that being, of course, is God. Now, why could God not think and not have a sense of humor? The answer is that if you have complete information, if you know everything, then you can't think, because thinking is only getting from one lot of information to a better lot of information. And if you're here already, you don't need to think. Similarly, with a sense of humor, if you know all the jokes and all the punchlines, then you can't be surprised at how you got there. So, theologically, it's quite correct. God cannot think, doesn't need to think, and can't have a sense of humor. He does, of course, have a sense of the ridiculous, otherwise he wouldn't have created us, but that's quite separate from the sense of humor. Now, by and large, in education and elsewhere, we try and get as far as we can towards a certain godlike state of having enough information, so much information in an area that we don't need to do much thinking. But there's one area where we can never really get enough information, and that area is the future. That when we're dealing with the past, we can go on increasing the information we have. But when we're dealing with the future, actions we have to take in the future, you can't really ever get enough information to do all your thinking for you. You have to do some thinking as well. I'll give you an example. Suppose I want to fly from London to Geneva, and I look up the timetable, I get my information, and the timetable says there's a Swiss Air flight, SR 815, which goes at 9:45 from London to Geneva. Now, I'm going to ask you, what sort of thinking do I need to do in addition to that? I've got the timetable, I've got that information. What sort of thinking do I need to do in addition to having that information? Let's have some suggestions. Yes?
Time zone change.
Okay, the time zone change, I may have to think of it or adjust my watch for 1 hour, yes?
Think what time we've got to get to the airport.
Yes, what time do I have to get to the airport? How far do I have to get ahead?
What clothes you wear for the climate.
Yes, good one. What's it going to be like, cold, warm?
How are you going to get to the airport?
Very good. How am I going to get? Underground, car, taxi, may have to think about rush hour. All right, so the point I'm making is that even where we do have information, like the 9:45 to Geneva, we still have to do a lot of information, a lot of thinking around that basic information. So we need both information and thinking. So what it amounts to is that thinking is no substitute for information, and information is no substitute for thinking. Now, there's a point which I'm going to make here, which I'll come back to later in the program, and this is the difference between what we might call cleverness and what we might call wisdom. And that's really rather an important point. Cleverness is like a camera with a very sharp focus, and that we can look at something very clearly and see it very clearly. Wisdom is really more where we spread out. We take many things into consideration, we expand what we're looking at, we bring many things in, rather like we were doing with the air flight. How many things do we have to consider in that area? Now let's move on and look at how we get information, how we use information. And there's really three things we need to look at. One is the information which is available, which is, as it were, in front of us. Then we look at, which is very important, the better use or best use of available information. And we'll do a little exercise on that. And I've got some shapes drawn out here, which I'm going to put up on the screen. Now, there. Any guesses at that stage? Go there. What?
M.
M. What else?
H.
H.
N.
N. What else? What else? You?
H.
H. We've had H, M, N,
X.
X. Yes?
K.
A.
K.
All right, let's move on a little bit. Now, anyone?
N.
N. Okay, it is N. The lady was quite right. She obviously knows her letters very well. She's right both times. The slight width there rather than there. Otherwise, in the beginning, it could have been an E, a Z, an H, an M, and so on. But at this stage, it's quite clearly is an N, which it is. What we're doing there is really working on the available information and using it to try and recognize some existing pattern, like the letters we know of the alphabet are very obvious existing patterns. So one of the uses of available information is to try and trigger off some available pattern, and then we say we recognize a pattern, we know all about it, we can use it. Now, another way of using information is obviously logic, and what we try and do in logic is to see how the different bits of information fit together. Suppose I wanted to get from town A to town B, and there's no immediate road. But I know, for example, that from A I can get to C, and then from C I can get to B. And by putting those two pieces of information together, we go from A to B. So one of the uses of logic is how we put together available bits of information to get more information from what we know. In logic, what we often try and do is to try and get ourselves in a situation where we say something either must be so, or the negative side, it can't be so, in order to allow us to move forward. Now, the other way of getting more information from what we have, logic is one way where we put things together. The other is something which I call dense reading, or very slow reading. Most people read much too fast, in a way. In other words, they really read through for the meaning rather than for all the implications. Dense reading is where we look at it, and this time, instead of trying to get at the must-be's and can't-be's, what we look at now in dense reading is things like maybe or could be. We can't be sure about these, but we say this may be so, this could be so. Now, before we started the program, I'd given you the little exercise about the statement, it seems to me there are a lot of shoe shops in Barcelona, which is a statement I happened to make in certain conditions about 3 months ago, and asked you to point out all the things which we could say reading out from that statement. In other words, the dense reading of that statement, all the things which could arise from it. And what I'm going to do now is have a look through some of the things you put down and see what you've got there. Dinah's going to give me the cards, and I'm going to read through some of these, picking out points which you've put down as dense reading of that statement. That there's Spanish leather is cheaper, maybe so, that more shoes, cheaper shoes, that there are indeed a lot of shoe shops in Barcelona, quite true, there may indeed be, that they have lots of shoes for different things, that maybe people use different shoes for morning, evening, hiking, whatever it is, so they need more shoe shops. In fact, the people buy more shoes, that Barcelona is prosperous and people might buy more shoes. None of these we can be sure about, but they're all maybe, could be. The shoes wear out quickly in Barcelona, which may mean that they wear out quickly or the quality is not so good. Statement made by someone not prepared to be too decisive. Fair enough, or perhaps the evidence wasn't strong enough. Okay, there's a number of these, and there's also additional ones, like it may be that in Barcelona all the shoe shops are in a certain part of town, and that is the part of town I happen to walk through. It may be that there are no large shoe shops in Barcelona, so therefore there's room for lots of little shoe shops. There's many, many implications, many, many maybe, could be statements we can make about it, and we explore the whole field, and then we can't decide the actual reason without more evidence, but we can look around it. We can scan around it. So one of the things we do in trying to get better use of the information available is to what we might call scan. Scan around what's given, and even more important, use our experience about the situation, about shoes, about fashion, and all this. What we're going to do now is a little exercise on scanning experience.